On today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, it is a Fairbanks Friday edition of the show where Nick Fairbanks will be joining me after returning home from FLA Live Arena, who he saw the Panthers play in person. We're going to discuss how the Panthers have won 3 out of the last 4 games by a final score of 5-1, the return of Sasha Barkov, and how the Florida Panthers just constantly got in transition against the Detroit Red Wings. We're going to discuss this next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Friday, December 9th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Where's your team every day? Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Veelez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MonoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers. And thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Don't forget to also follow the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. And don't forget to send in your screenshot of your subscription to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast on YouTube and your 5-star rating to at LO_FLA Panthers on Twitter, or email it to me at lockedonflapanthers@gmail.com for your chance to win 2 free tickets to the Florida Panthers versus New Jersey Devils game on December 21st. So, Cats fans, the Florida Panthers return home from their West Coast trip where, as we discussed on yesterday's show, that returning home actually returned during the daytime. They didn't do an overnight flight from Winnipeg, didn't do a morning skate. There's still more updates on the Panthers with as far as the roster. Anton Lundell out again for dealing with an illness, left behind in Seattle, and then just recently returned home. The Florida Panthers call up Alex Lyon with Spencer Knight dealing with his own illness, and Alexei Heponiemi being sent down. But returning home, and usually teams have a hard time adjusting after a West Coast trip because of routine. But man, what a show for the Florida Panthers, welcoming the Detroit Red Wings, who have won 5 straight road games. And man, what a game for the Florida Panthers to return home. And now 3 out of the last 4 games, the Florida Panthers have won by a final score of 5-1 in that span. So some great hockey that the Florida Panthers have been playing as of late, and a lot of different contributors. This time, 13 different Florida Panthers got on the board today as far as points. But let me bring in my guest onto the show. It's a Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, and we have a Nick Fairbanks who just got back from FLA Live Arena, who got to see this dub in person. Nick, how are you feeling about all this?
My voice is probably a little bit raspy, but I'm doing well, and was a little worried going into this game just because it was first game at home after a long road trip, and you're playing a team that is playing above what it was expected, and they took out the defending Eastern Conference champions in the Tampa Bay Lightning, so didn't know what you were going to get, but very happy with the result nonetheless.
Yeah, and of course, with the Tampa Bay Lightning putting a lot of shots on Detroit in the last period, Ville Husso standing on his head on Tuesday, but the Detroit Red Wings put Alex Nedeljkovic between the pipes for this one, and we saw quite a lot of Alex Nedeljkovic, especially in 2021, where they were in the same division as Carolina, was in the race for the Calder Trophy, which eventually Kirill Kaprizov won that year. But the Panthers, the story of this game was just transition for this team. just consistently getting their sticks in the neutral zone, taking advantage of bad shift changes by the Detroit Red Wings. There's a bad pass from Dominic Kubalik to Ben Sherratt that was like 5 feet away from him that got the Panthers on a rush as well. That there's all different types of rushes for all different types of reasons for the Florida Panthers, and even quite a few shorthanded opportunities. They got 2 shorthanded shots on goal. Sasha Barkov and Sam Reinhart were part of one. And let's get to that. The captain, he returned after it was reported. Well, not reported. Barkov's dad officially confirmed what it was to finish a newspaper about him having pneumonia, and now him coming back feeling better. And wow, was this guy missed? When you talk about the faceoffs, back checks, and just gaining the zone as well. It's great to have number 16 back for the Panthers.
You finally have that full, complete 200-foot player back in your lineup that you can trust in any situation. It changes the paradigm of the game, but it also changes how you, I guess, view the game. He was definitely noticeable in every aspect. I did say in our little chat that even in warm-ups, Barkov looked like he was energized. He was quick. He just looked like he was happy to be back on the ice. So definitely could see that the team was different. And also, he provided the way to the 5-1 win tonight.
Yeah, and he was responsible for the Etu-Luostarinen goal. I mean, when you saw Sam Reinhart gaining the zone, I mean, usually when Barkov's on the ice, all eyes are on him, but in that situation, all eyes were on Sam Reinhart, and then gets a drop pass to Barkov, gets to the top of the slot, and then just wrists one, and then Etu-Luostarinen gets that one. That was for the third goal of the game for the Panthers. I mean, excuse me, second goal of the game for the Panthers. And Etu is 2 away from tying his career high in goals. I mean, an increased role for Etu-Luostarinen as well. But also what's great about this was just the call-ups continuing to just produce. I mean, Chris Tierney, he got an assist on Zach Dalpe's goal just the other night in transition, and then taking advantage of a bad shift change by the Detroit Red Wings. I mean, Mark Stahl, a pass from blue line to blue line, and then Chris Tierney takes care of the rest on Alex Nedeljkovic, and it's been the young guys. And Jacob Wyden said it best. He did not have Chris Tierney scoring first on his bingo card. Did you have it on your bingo card?
I did not. I was expecting another goal from the fourth line, but my money would have been on Zach Dalpe again, just because he just seems like he was a point per game player, up in Charlotte. So you think he'd be, keeping that role going. But I have to say, Tierney's goal was kind of soft. Nedeljkovic got beat 5-hole on the backhand. That's something that Bob might give up and, lose confidence of the team. But, luckily that didn't happen tonight. And, that just is the story of Nedeljkovic over the last season or two, just giving up soft goals and not giving his team a chance to win. But hats off to the guys that have come up from Charlotte and actually really played a solid couple of games. I know the last game was not the best. But it didn't seem like Florida was completely out of that game, towards the end against Winnipeg. But, they were outplayed for most of it. But tonight, it didn't seem like they were out of place at all. They were forechecking very well. They were plugging up the neutral zone and everything, and never gave Detroit really a sniff or a chance of really trying to gain control of this game. So when you have all 4 lines that are able to succinctly do that, you have a good chance to win.
Mm-hmm. And because you were there in person and not listening to the broadcast quite a few times mentioned this looked like the Florida Panthers team of last year. I mean, they were getting in they're like we mentioned at the top, getting in transition. I mean, Nick Cousins on that goal that eventually Kierstead was right in front of. I thought that Nick Cousins was going to just take it by himself, and even as the Panthers were letting the play develop, even then Detroit was just having a hard time just getting back, and that's really what had Matt Kierstead score that goal. And also another thing, Matthew Tkachuk, we see when we watch games on Bally Sports versus ESPN Plus, of course, the Bally Sports guys are seeing everything through the Panthers lens all season long. So maybe they might not make as many comparisons as far as the rest of the league. But of course, when you see ESPN Plus games or TNT or anything, they have a full picture view and of course comparisons as well. Do you know who leads the league in most passes from behind the net in the NHL?
Well, it's got to be either Matthew Tkachuk or somebody who plays on the power play, one of the top power play units. But I'm going to go with Matthew Tkachuk.
It's Matthew Tkachuk, not only on the Panthers, but in the NHL, in the whole league.
That's his kitchen.
Another stat was shortest distance that their goals are scored, which was 6.6 feet. And Matthew Tkachuk has the shortest distance of his goals from there. And that justifies the trade even more. And let's just go to his goal. Let's just talk about the beauty about how he just uses his hand. Rasmussen is drawing towards him, but even then, to get it back to his forehand and then just snap it real quick before Nedeljkovic probably thinking that it was going to be passed and then goes top shelf. Oh man, what a thing of beauty for Matthew Tkachuk on that goal.
Well, for one thing, I was glad I was live tonight because I was definitely not going to take in the ESPN commentating tonight. I don't think I would have listened to it. It would have been muted. But that aside, that goal by Matthew Tkachuk, seeing that live, I thought he was going to pass it for sure. I thought he was going to pull Huberdeau because I believe he either had Sam Bennett or he had, I think it was for Hagee streaking in. And you just, come on, like you had the open wing there, but you know what? The fact that he was able to snap it as quickly as he did over the shoulder of Nedeljkovic was a thing of beauty. Something that we're not often used to seeing. I mean, there's only maybe a few players, if that can actually snap it that quickly and with that much accuracy. So it was a big goal at that time because I believe that was the third goal.
That was the fifth.
It was the fifth goal. Okay, well, there was a flurry of goals in that second period. So judging by how Detroit plays, they were down 4-1 against an opponent, I think maybe less than a week ago or maybe a week ago, and they made it a game. They scored, 3 straight and tied it up. Judging the way that Florida plays, that was a big goal. Whether you want to call it, highlight worthy or whatever, but it literally did separate them from Detroit completely and basically shut down the game after that. So hats off to Matthew. Still really happy with the trade, a guy who's been consistent all year long, but also, he's getting it done in the areas that the Panthers couldn't get it done in the past. And, I'm really excited and I want to see what happens going forward to see, how that pays dividends going, in the future.
Absolutely. And we'll talk more of paying dividends and we'll actually talk about the last 4 games for the Panthers and trying to get a little bit more perspective on really this current stretch, even though sometimes they have dropped points. So let's take a little bit of a step back and look over the macro view of this team at this moment in time. But first, we're going to tell you all about BetOnline. And BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get all the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football, basketball, soccer, esports, we've got it all at BetOnline. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to getting your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Back on this Friday, December 9th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, on this Fairbanks Friday edition of the show, where the Florida Panthers are coming off a 5-1 victory over the Detroit Red Wings. So, Nick, how big was this win? Like five straight road games that Detroit was on. Now the Panthers winning 9 of their last 10 against the Detroit Red Wings at FLA Live Arena. We spoke all preseason, off season about how every game in the Atlantic Division is a 4-point swing. with Detroit getting better, Buffalo's getting better. I mean, Tage Thompson scored 5 goals just last night. Incredible. And of course, Boston having a better than expected season. And of course, the Panthers now winning 3 out of the last 4 games by a final score of 5-1 in each of those games, a plus 12 goal differential in all of them. Of course, dropped that dud in Paul Maurice's return to Winnipeg after first dealing with the injuries. But what I want to get a wellness check out of you. What are you thinking about the Panthers through the Western Canadian trip and then first game back home?
Well, first I'll say that the games against Vancouver and Seattle were much needed. They were confidence boosters. I know Vancouver's not the best team and everything, but if you don't beat the teams that you're expected to beat, then you're not better than them. You're, only as good as, the opponents that you play. So that was a big win, but I also think the biggest win was Seattle, just because that team had been, very hot and they've been playing very solidly. And I think they won their game after Florida. So it just goes to show that if you put in a team effort and then everybody does their job, this team can win. If you get solid goaltending like you did tonight with Bobrovsky, you can get a win. So I think the players are starting to get it. You're starting to see the team kind of come together and play more, gel a little bit more. You're seeing more chemistry. I think it took, Bennett, Chuck, and Verhaeghe a little bit just to get to know each other as far as like playing on a line together. And then, you had tonight with Barkov, Eetu Luostarinen, and who else did he play with tonight? Trying to remember who the other winger was. Reinhardt, sorry. It shows that the team is starting to trust who they're paired with, who they're going to be playing with, and also who they're going to be matched up against. Like I said, all 4 lines tonight played their part. They didn't allow Detroit anything outside of the power play, which I'm going to blame Bob on that one. He should have just gloved that puck. It should not have been a rebound, but whatever. It's 1 goal, and he didn't give up anything else. He played a good game, but you see the maturation in this team right now in the system that they're playing, and I think they're really starting to trust the process now. What is really going to be important going forward is, are they going to be able to sustain it playing against the teams within their own division? You said these are all 4-point games this season. Detroit's no slouch this season, so they're going to have to continue that again. They're playing them again in January. They're going to have to play Boston a bunch of times. They're going to have to play Tampa Bay here soon. So it's really going to show if they actually are buying in and willing to stick with the program rather than get away from it. Sorry.
Yeah, and it's little bits at a time with this team. I mean, sure, when you might look at 0 for 3 on the power play for the Panthers, but man, that power play was just constantly like right on the doorstep. I mean, Barkov had a great chance right in front. I mean, that hit the crossbar. It was a little bit of a scrambling puck for the Panthers. I mean, they in just two of them in the first period took a lot of the ice away from the Detroit Red Wings. I mean, 8 shots on those 2 power plays as well. And the third one doesn't really, the game was already out of hand, but loved seeing the 4th line getting power play time in a blowout as well after getting rewarded. And also honorable mention for Josh Mahura getting on the score sheet, which was another goal that was in transition for the Panthers as well. And they're going to have to rely on this goaltending for at least, I believe it's going to be the next 2 games for the Panthers, with Spencer Knight dealing with an illness. Unfortunately, they do have a back-to-back, but with the Panthers, you can't outscore all your problems. That's something I mentioned yesterday, but they are finding their ways of getting their goals via turnovers as well. So that whole starting on the defensive end, it's kind of starting to like manifest a little bit.
It definitely is. And maybe the defensemen are starting to get the picture of transition and everything. I mean, think about it. You have Mark Stahl, who's a newcomer. You have Kierstad, who's not, he's not a stable Florida Panther. He's not here all the time. And I really wish he wasn't wearing number 3. It just kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies, but he scored tonight, so good for him. It's his 2nd goal of his NHL career, so hats off to him. But I think you're starting to see the defense get a little bit more in tune with what they have to do and really trying to push it up to the forwards now to get that transition game going and really trying to catch teams off guard, when they are making line changes. So, like I said, maybe the system and maybe the way that they're supposed to be playing is now starting to come together, and that everybody's starting to understand that part and learning how to win, apart from how they did it last year. So I'll be honest, even with the 5-1 lead going into the third period, I was kind of scared that they were just going to turtle and everything, but it didn't seem like they were doing that. They basically took away the ice still from Detroit and still laid the pressure on them. So it was good to see, that part of the game instead of, going to a 1-3-1 stature.
Yeah, and the Detroit Red Wings as well. I mean, it's still a team that's still like, yeah, they're up and coming, but they were just coming off a little bit of a winning streak as well. So whenever it comes to a team that's towards the end of their road trip, and of course still very young, you're definitely gonna have some bumps on the road. And for them running into Florida, who's just felt like they had points it felt like they had meat left on the bone from their road trip, especially the Edmonton game last Monday. So it just felt like a different vibe coming in, especially where I guess Tuesday was like where all the injuries were just piling on at one time, and it's just like it kind of felt like we were just throwing our hands up. It's like, this is an expected loss for the Panthers. At least that's how I felt coming in. But then you have a few days to just reset as well. And the Panthers, of course, we can't mention enough Barkov being back, about how just the energy as well of why they came into, they had the jump that they had. Had Barkov been on that trip the whole time and they maybe got one more win out of it, would we have seen this energy out of the Panthers? I don't know.
No, I'll be honest. I saw that team in Winnipeg. They were outmatched most of the time. That's a big team. That is a big physical team. It's very tough to play, defensive style against them, especially when you have guys that are 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", forechecking you as well as they were, and just playing the body. And then you come home and you feel rejuvenated. I know it's the opposite. Usually that happens, that after a long road trip, you usually drop your first game at home. But, perfect timing for Barkov to come back and really give this team a boost, be that first line center, and change the complete paradigm of how this team operates. So, I know Paul Maurice took heat for this and everything, but he did say it, he needs Barkov back, and, look what happened tonight. I will give credit where it's due. And yes, Barkov definitely was sorely missed and needed. I don't know anybody who would object to that, but maybe it's because we don't like to make excuses for injuries, or injuries as an excuse. But at the same time, that guy is a top 5 player in the league, and probably a top Selke trophy candidate for years to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you have a player that changes the dynamic that much, he's definitely, you definitely see the difference on the ice when he's there and when he's not. But we're going to transition to segment number 3, where we're going to discuss the weekend for the Panthers. They'll be having a back-to-back in Tampa Bay and back at FLA Live Arena Sunday against the Seattle Kraken. So we're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Friday, December 9th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Nick Fairbanks is back on the show after he experienced a 5-1 victory for the Florida Panthers in person at FLA Live Arena. And the first thing I want to get to is, the Florida Panthers really protected Sergei Bobrovsky really well tonight. Not a lot of shots around him. Sure, the one goal that he gave up went through him, and the Detroit Red Wings were there to clean it up. But with Spencer Knight having an illness, Alex Lyon coming back up for the Panthers. I mean, he's won an AHL championship, the Calder Cup, for the Chicago Wolves of the Carolina Hurricanes organization. But what are the chances that Sergei Bobrovsky starts both of them? Because I think they're fairly high that he starts both of them.
So I'll be honest, I think the only way that he starts both of them is if he completely gets obliterated in the first game and they pull him for rest. I don't know if he has the ability to play back-to-back games now against Tampa Bay, but you know what? I've been wrong before. I may be wrong again. Actually, I know I'll be wrong again. My wife will tell you that. I think he has the ability to do it, but it's really going to depend on how the team plays in front of him. I mean, the fact that they only allowed one goal tonight and they were really playing that puck possession and not allowing a lot of chances, against Detroit, you're not going to get that with Tampa Bay. They have so many weapons, and listen, we know this. It's not one player you got to defend against. You have multiple points that you have to, Braden Point as well, but you have multiple threats that you have to deal with, and especially on that power play, I don't know. They have to play a strong game. They have to play a disciplined game and not let Tampa get under their skin. They have to play a good defensive game, and really they need to bail out Bob. Now, if Bob plays really well Saturday, and we have to play again on Sunday, I don't know. It really depends on, how high scoring the game's going to be, or if it's going to be low scoring. If it's low scoring, I say roll them out again. If it's going to be high scoring, maybe you put Lyon out there and you see what he's got. I mean, he has experience. He's played in the NHL before. He's been serviceable. There's a reason why Florida did sign him, and maybe the team will play better in front of him, kind of like what they do in front of Spencer Knight. So, I could see multiple angles on this one.
Mm-hmm. I do think Bob will for sure get the start against Tampa Bay over Alex Lyon. I think that's a given. But it just really depends on the amount of shots taken as well. But Bob is never going to tell you that he's going to be a tired man out there. He's going to be like, okay, I'm good to go the next day. And of course, the Florida Panthers coming off a win just less than 2 weeks after facing the Kraken in Seattle, now facing them at home on a Sunday, just a little under 24 hours after a game against the Lightning on a Saturday, a very quick trip up the Gulf Coast. So we just really depends. And listen, you're not going to get a shutout against these guys. You're against Tampa Bay. I mean, just too many weapons. I mean, Steven Stamkos just got point number 1,000 just the other day. Victor Hedman, a Norris Trophy winner, Vasilevsky, 2-time Stanley Cup champion, Braden Point, one of the fastest skaters, fastest hands as well, just down the middle as well. I mean,
don't forget about diving Nikita Kucherov. Like, it seems like anytime a stick touches him, he's flying off somewhere and acting like, he's got the plague. I can't stand it. But yeah, as you're saying, they just have multiple weapons, and there's no way that you're going to be able to stop them both. Maybe just contain, or at least limit the amount of chances that they have. So, that should be the game plan going in. Yeah.
And yeah, the Tampa Bay Lightning, they just faced the Preds tonight. I haven't checked that score since it was 2-2.
Last I checked, they were up 4-2.
Okay, they won. They ended up winning against the Preds. It was 2-2 at one point in that game. So they're coming off a win, and let's see if they'll be on a back-to-back as I'm loading their schedule. They will not be on a back-to-back, so we can expect Vasilevsky to be between the pipes for the Tampa Bay Lightning there. And of course, we've seen a lot of Vasi over the last half decade, that's for sure. And it's some good, some bad, mostly the latter for the Panthers in this matchup against the Tampa Bay Lightning. But hey, it's a 4:30 game, Bally Sports Florida, and hopefully it's a good enough game that we see this Florida Panthers team just right back up at FLA Live Arena and pick up a win against a Seattle team that they just beat just a few weeks ago. And hey, who knows, maybe their first 3-game winning streak of the season. But Nick, any last words before we sign off on this Fairbanks Friday edition of the show? Because I know you were definitely pumped after that performance in person, and I hope that someone else in your household isn't taking this loss too hard.
Well, we did leave a couple minutes early, so take that with what you will. But no, it was just good to see the team put together another full 60-minute, effort. I think, with this team, you're going to see that more often, just because I think they're starting to play for each other. They're starting to get it. And I also think that they can't win without having those type of performances. But, Panther fans, keep your heads up. I know that there's been a lot of frustrating losses this year. I know that Winnipeg was frustrating. Edmonton was really frustrating. Calgary was frustrating and everything. But, I think the team is starting to turn that corner that we keep, talking about. All their expected goals, are starting to come through. They're scoring 5 goals a game over the last couple of games. I'm not saying it's going to last forever, but, let's enjoy it as it is right now. And, hopefully we can put together a couple wins this weekend and put ourselves back into a playoff spot and, start to ride that wave.
Yeah, and now with the updated standings, the Florida Panthers have gone to 1 point, just 1 point out of a playoff spot as we speak, with the Detroit Red Wings having a game in hand, but the Panthers do have a game in hand on the New York Rangers, so still very much in control of everything right in front of them. And there's a big weekend with another 4-point swing type of game on Saturday afternoon against the Tampa Bay Lightning. But Nick, thank you so much once again for joining me on the show. Tell everybody where they can find you online.
Thank you again, Armando, for having me on, and glad it was a Victory Friday edition of the show. But you guys can follow me at Prudentious0 on Twitter. I would be very glad for more follows or any kind of retweets or anything, or if you guys just want to talk about the game, I'm here for it. But Armando, thank you again for having me on.
Absolutely, Nick, and I will see you next week, my friend.
Yes, sir.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Make sure to subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And for your second listen of the day, make sure you listen to today's episode of Locked On Sports Today. Locked On Sports Today gives you a podcast 20 minutes or less covering the entirety of the sports scene with exclusive interviews and the take of the day. Locked On Sports Today, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. So I'm Armando Veelez with Nick Fairbanks, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.